So, hey everyone, really excited to be presenting to all of you today with so many of us present here on a Sunday afternoon with the vision of learning something new and being the best version of ourselves. So, many thanks for joining today, and many thanks to Women Tech Makers for organizing this at such a scale and doing it so smoothly, this being day 4 of the event series. So the topic that I'm going to be talking about today is framework-agnostic web components in general and in Angular. So the session today looks mostly like this. I'm going to start off with the introduction of what are web components, what we're going to be talking about. We'll then look at what are the web component specifications. There are some specifications that we need to follow when we are talking about web components. So we'll look at that. Then we look at the Angular way of doing web components. So how Angular does web components and how we can consume web components in Angular. We'll look at that. And if time allows, we'll look at some code as well. So I hope you enjoy this session today. Now, if you're into web, you would have a hint that JavaScript is almost ruling the world of web development right now. And with so many frameworks being out there, React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, with so many frameworks out there, we do come into a situation, we do come across a situation where we have to figure out which framework to go for, which has a higher or lower steeper learning curve, and which framework is required more by the industry in the industry. So all of that things we do face such situations, right? And that's when we come across something called framework fatigue. Now, this is actually a term. Framework fatigue, this term was coined and it's mentioned in the book Web Components in Action. And it basically means that, with so many frameworks out there, with ones which are already existing and with ones, which are going to come, we do have to accept that, right? And we can come into situations where we'll have to figure out which one framework particularly to go for. Now, this is something that we can't change, but what we can change is the way we look at the web right now. So imagine there's a situation where you can actually build something and use it in different framework projects without having actually the knowledge of that other framework. But then you should be able to pick it up as a JavaScript code, put it somewhere in maybe a React framework project, and just be able to use it. That would be awesome, won't it? And that's when web components come into picture. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. That's kind of the purpose why web components are required and are used quite a lot right now. So um, the web, if you look at the web right now, it's almost componentized. And what I mean by that is, so for example, you have a view on a website, and that view can either be one component per view, or there can be multiple components on a view, but it's all components. And you would love it if you can just pick that particular component and use it wherever you want to. And to put it better, I've used this particular example. So let's say you have one framework project and you really like this red background component with the cup of tea in it. And you want to use this particular thing that you coded in one framework, let's say Angular. You really like this thing and you want to use the same thing. Maybe there's a requirement of the same component in the other project. Let's imagine, for example, it's a calendar component that you build and it's not using any library that you can simply reuse, right? So you would simply want to pick it from here, use it in the React code. Now you're new into React and you don't understand how to build such an advanced component that you did using Angular. You would want to just reuse it, pick it from here, place it in your React code, and it should just work. That's when web components really help you do that. And I would like to put it like this. This is kind of a layman way of putting the need of web components. And it says that I want to take something that I'm interested in and create a reusable piece out of that, so that I should be then able to share it with whoever wants to use it. It can be my team, myself in the different projects, or just publish it to an NPM registry. And a little official way of putting it is, this is the official document, official definition of web components. And since this tries to explain quite a lot, we'll break this definition down and then try to understand what it says. So web components are a set of web platform APIs that allow you to create new, custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML tags. So let's try to understand this first part of the definition first. So it says that web components allow you to build new custom, which means that it's your functionality, that you would want to have in your web component. It's not a regular calendar component or a regular color picker component. You have your own functionality that you've used in that particular component, and you want that to be reusable. That's the next part of the definition. I mean, the next word that's used in the definition. So you want to create a reusable web component. Now, the third thing that it says, which is the encapsulated HTML tags, is very important. So let's understand it bit by bit. It says encapsulated. What does that mean? Now, let's say you're using one web component and you're consuming it inside an Angular application. The styles in which can conflict with whatever styles you have given to your web component also. Now, for example, you're trying to fetch the style by using an ID or anything, or for example, just a node. Let's say document.getElement by ID, whatever ID that you've given to your particular node. Now that can extract the node from your web component as well as your Angular consuming application. And you would not want that because your web component is an isolated thing and you would not want those to be conflicted. That's where encapsulation comes into picture. You don't want your styles and your nodes, HTML nodes, to be leaking outside or inside of your web component. That's really important. And then it says HTML tags. What does that even mean? Is it just not a selector? Now, this means that as the browser understands your div tag or h1 tag or any other tag like that, it should also be able to understand your tag, that the selector that you give to your web component, your custom element. So let's say you've given your selector name as WTM India. If that's your selector name, do you think the browser would understand that if you just place it there? No, right? So we need to do some configuration. We need to create our web component in a way that browser has been registered with that particular custom element, and it treats the WTM India selector just like it treats your div tag or an h1 tag. That's what web components will give you the power of. So there are some specifications we saw in the definition that there are some specifications web components follow, and these are those specifications. And we'll go through each one of these one by one to understand what web components are all about. Now, the first specification is HTML template. We have shadow DOM, we have custom elements, we have ES modules, and then we have HTML imports. But as you see, I've just striked off HTML imports. So let's just talk about that for a moment. Now, HTML imports was a web component specification, and it basically meant that you'll be able to import your HTML documents within other documents. That's what HTML imports allowed us to do, right? Now, there were various problems with using imports, with like multiple imports in your application and frame sets and iframes, which is why many browsers did not accept it, and we could not include it as a web component specification. So now we have these 4 specifications for web components, and let's look at each of these one by one. So talking about HTML template, first of all. So whenever you're creating a web component, you can just wrap it inside, the 2 div elements, and it should work, right? You might be wondering why to even include it inside a template tag. But it has some advantages when you're building your web component. So if you include all of your web component code, obviously the view part of it, the HTML part of it, inside the template tag, it would render only when the component is activated. Otherwise, it won't take the space in your DOM at all. The DOM won't activate the particular web component at all till the time you're actually using it. The second part is there is no images or videos that will hamper your load time because they're not even rendering till the time you're needing those, right? So that way, template really helps you. The other thing, the other web component specification is shadow DOM. Now, remember we were talking about encapsulation. That's where shadow DOM comes into the picture. Now, it's not a mandate that you have to use shadow DOM, but it always keeps you, it keeps your web component very isolated and in itself, and gives you more, power to do and play around things related to web components. So you would have an encapsulated DOM. This goes back to when I was talking about document.getElement ID, and you're trying to get a node, and it would not leak outside, like your particular div with a particular ID will not go outside if your web component is encapsulated. It will just be isolated, and your consuming application won't have access to it until you want it to have the access to it. The other thing is scope CSS. So your styles will not be, leaking outside, and there's no overriding of styles that will happen if you use shadow DOM for your web component. Now, you might be wondering that, you can always give this, you can always, use important for marking your styles as important so that they don't get overridden. But do you really think you would want to do that for all of your styles in your web component to make sure it's not overridden? No, right? It's not very friendly. So that's about scoped, shadow DOM. Then you have custom elements, which is the most important specification in your web component specifications. And now there might be a time when get confused about what is the difference between web components and custom elements. But I'll try to, I'll make sure that you understand the difference precisely, because when I got into web components, this is what I was really getting confused about. And I would ask everybody that why don't we use just one term? It's just web components, custom elements, just the same thing. So I'll try to clear that. Yeah, so custom elements is such an important specification in web components. It's almost the linchpin of the specifications. This is what holds the web components all together. That's really important. And what it means is that whatever selector you're giving to your component is what it takes to register it to your browser, for your browser to understand that, okay, this particular selector, this particular custom element is what contains all the configuration for your web component. So now, as I've written here, my reusable element, this is an element that I've created, and I want to register it to the DOM so that the browser just understands it like another div element or an H1 element. So this is where custom elements and web components differentiate. Custom element is an important part of web components. Here, it would mean that this is a selector that that goes to the browser and registers whatever functionality your web component contains. But then web components do have other specifications, as we just saw: HTML template, shadow DOM, ES modules, custom elements. So custom elements and web components have that difference. Now, there's this very interesting website that you would be interested in, and it as it says, it makes sure that frameworks and custom elements can work together really well, and it gives you the percentage of how which framework is compatible with creating custom elements, creating web components. Now I hope you understand the usage of terms custom elements and web components here. And to give a better perspective of why we'll be doing this with Angular, I have added this particular screenshot. This is from this particular website, Custom Elements Everywhere, and this tells us that how Angular is compatible with creating custom elements. It's about creating custom elements and web components with regards to the compatibility in terms of whatever data binding or component communication that we use. So that is pretty much similar. We'll look at that. And the score that it gives Angular is 100%, and all the test cases pass. This is because of obviously some similarities that we have in the way we create web components regularly just using vanilla JavaScript, or the way we do that using Angular. So next thing is that let's look at how do we create web components. Now this is a non-Angular way of doing it, the way we are looking at it right now. So if you want to define a custom element, you would just have a class, a regular JavaScript class, which would extend HTML element. Now, this is really important because you want to define a custom element, and your browser should understand that. But your browser understands only the things that are HTML elements, right? So in that case, what you really need to do is extend HTML elements so that browser thinks that, okay, this particular custom element that's coming in is something of sort of HTML elements, and it would then consider it. However, if you don't register it to the DOM, what would happen? It would think that, okay, it's not an HTML element, and it would just ignore it. There would be no error in the browser, but it will just ignore it. And if you see in the next line, it says custom elements.define, then it gives some selector value and then gives the name of your whatever class you're using, whatever component name that you're defining. Custom elements is the API, and it has the method define to give the browser a particular selector that will be registering in the browser. So this particular ng search bar that you see here, ng-search-bar, is the selector that the browser should understand. And the search bar component is what it will lead to. So your selector ng search bar means this particular component and whatever functionality you've given inside this component. So custom elements API is the main thing that allows you to create custom elements, define custom elements. And this is similar to what we'll be using in Angular, and try to relate the things the way we are doing in vanilla JavaScript to what we'll do in Angular. And you'll understand why the score is 100% and how much is the compatibility. Now, custom elements have something called reactions. And this is exactly like we have lifecycle hooks in Angular. So I've just written lifecycle hooks there for you to be able to relate to, how we do it in React, for example. We would have component did mount, component did unmount. In Angular, we would have ng on init, ng on destroy, right? Similarly, exactly just the way frameworks work, we have custom element reactions. And here it would mean whenever your browser has a DOM node, the DOM has a node attaching to it, it would call the lifecycle hook, or let's say reaction, because custom elements call it reactions. It would invoke the connected callback function. Similarly, if it wants to remove the node from the DOM, similarly it will call disconnected callback. And just like the way we have ng on changes to detect any changes in the attributes, we would have attribute changed callback here. Now, the way the life cycle of the component is working in frameworks, it's very similar to the way custom elements work. The only thing required is just to extend HTML elements so the browser understands that, okay, this is also going to be an HTML element. Now, the next thing, if you try to relate in your custom elements and your frameworks, you would see that the way we have reactions in custom elements, we have life cycle hooks in frameworks, or let's say Angular. Then we have properties in our custom elements. So for example, if I go back to this slide, not this one, but this one. So we have this selector, right? ng search bar. And let's say if you want to pass some property from the consuming application to this particular custom element, because it always depends on the context, right? For example, in your React code, you want to have the calendar settings, calendar configuration as something else. And in your Angular application, you want the calendar configuration as something else. Now, if you build your web component separately and you just pass it on to different frameworks, it would have one configuration which you might not be able to change as per the context. That's when this particular selector would want to have something coming from the consuming application telling the web component that, okay, this is something that you have to use for this particular context. Would be very easy for you to communicate, right? This is the communication that we were talking about, that web components allow us to communicate between different frameworks. So that's about properties. And if you want to relate it to the way we do it in frameworks, we have input property, which passes properties from the parent component to the child component, the nested components. And the way we do property binding using square brackets, we'll look at that. Then we have custom events, and that's about passing events from the web component to the outside application or the consuming application. And we do that using output and event binding in Angular. So for example, there's a click in the child component. In this case, it's a web component. And you want to capture this click and you want to do something in the consuming application. That's when you would want to use custom events, because you want to have your web component communicating with your consuming application. This is again very important. Now, if you've created custom attribute directives in Angular to play around with the behavior or the appearance or the layout of your particular DOM element, in that case you would have used host binding. Now, host binding is something that allows you to play around with the properties of capture the property of your attribute of your DOM element and then use it in the directives. This is exactly what attributes help us in custom elements. So if it's getting a bit of confusing to you right now, you'll understand it when we do the practical example of it. Now, if I go back again and try to relate all the things that are so compatible, reactions which are exactly like lifecycle hooks, properties which are like property binding, custom events which is just like event binding, attributes, it's almost very similar. And then we think of combining these two. Why not do it together? Just use Angular to create a custom element, not creating it in a vanilla JavaScript project. And that's when Angular elements come into picture. So Angular elements is a package inside. You have to add it separately. It doesn't come with Angular core package. And mainly when you're trying to create web components with Angular, That's when you would install it. You would add this package, Angular Elements. And what this basically helps you do is, okay, let's look at the installation first. So you can do npm install Angular Elements. Now, this is kind of a disclaimer that whenever you're working with the web components, the most important thing for you is to deal with polyfills. And if you're not aware what polyfills are, so imagine that, I mean, just take the example of different browsers. There are some browsers which support a particular functionality, but then there are other browsers that do not support some functionalities. And to make sure that all the browsers have this compatibility to be, hosting your web component, you have to make polyfills your best friend. And we'll look at that more. So if you do npm install Angular Elements, it would not get you any polyfill. However, if you want to get the polyfill that comes with the Angular Elements package, you can just do ng add Angular Elements. Now, this polyfill is very light in size, but then the polyfill doesn't make sure that it would work in all the different browsers. So we have many other polyfills which come with web components package, and we'll look at those and then include those in our application so that it works. The other thing that you need to install is the web components package, web components custom elements package. So this is really important because you're dealing with web components, you're dealing with custom elements. You need to let the browser know that it's a custom element, it's a web component, and you need to register it to the DOM, right? This is why web components is really important. And this is why I put this animation here, because polyfills should be your best friend. Otherwise, you'll end up with errors that you'll never understand why it's happening, and polyfills will be the thing. The browser will not even throw an error that that will help you understand that, okay, is it the polyfills? So make sure you remember polyfills from the very start whenever you're dealing with web components. The next thing is the polyfills again. So you need to import these polyfills manually because the polyfill that comes with Angular might not give you the support for all the browsers. So you go ahead and install 2 polyfills, which will make sure that your web component is accessible to all the different browsers. And there's these 2 polyfills. One is the native shim, the other is custom elements. These 2 will help you, will do the job for you. Now, let's get into a practical mode a bit. And you're trying to create a component. Let's call it reuse element for now. And since you want to keep it an isolated thing, you're just inlining the template and you're inlining the style. And since you would want to use a selector, you're just giving it a prefix which is called web. So it will be web reuse element. The name of your selector will be web reuse element. So this is something that the component that you just created looks like. It's called web reuse element, the selector name, the template is in line, the styles are in line. This is what we wanted, right? So this is a whole new component within itself that you want to use for as your custom element. This is what we'll be passing to all the different other frameworks for use. Now, remember we were talking about Shadow DOM. So make sure you set encapsulation as Shadow DOM to make sure that your styles do not leak out, your DOM nodes do not leak out. And the component template in this example, what I'm trying to do is this is the inline template that I've written here, and I've simply created an input field, and it takes the placeholder as an input from the consuming application. As you see, I've interpolated it here, the Angular way of interpolating, any properties. So we've just interpolated here. It will receive the value from whatever consuming application is, be it React, be it Angular, or any other framework. And this simply displays you a search field. This is what we have created in our component. The input binding says that, okay, this text field should be coming from the consuming application. Okay, good to go. The text field is coming from the consuming application, and we have already created an input kind of a component. The next thing is that we need to register our web component in the module. Now, we know that in Angular, we need to register all the components in the module for the compiler to understand that there's a component that exists, right? This was the case before at least Angular 9. With Angular 9 coming up, we have many more things with the decorator, with ID. So you don't really need entity components array. We'll come to that. So yeah, in the ng module, decorator, you just give the declaration and you just define the name of whatever component. In our case, it's called search bar component, and you would you'll just inject you'll have dependency injection in case you have to get any other dependency injection. Now, this is very important. Just like we bootstrap a component whenever we are dealing with, whenever we want to launch a particular component at the start of our application, there are times when we don't want to do it, when we don't want Angular to do it, but we want to do it manually. That's when ng do bootstrap method allows you to do that. So you're not using the bootstrap array now, but you have this method wherein you're creating this custom element, which is the search bar component that you just created. So create custom element comes as a part of Angular elements package. And here you simply use the search bar component and do the dependency injection if required. And finally, use the same thing that we were doing in the custom elements. You're using the custom elements API, the define method, giving it the selector name, and search bar, which is the name that you've used here for creating your custom element. And you can also do that, just in the main.ts file, which is the entry file to your Angular application. This would be exactly like the way you did it in ng do bootstrap. The only difference is you're not going to the app module now. You're doing it in the main.ts file, which is the entry file to your application, to your Angular application. And whenever we are dealing with web components or dynamic components in Angular, we have to make sure, we used to have to make sure that we add it to the entry components array. But like I said, starting Angular 9, we don't need to add our component to entry components array, because with Ivy, the component doesn't need to be, we don't need to specifically mention it as an entry component, because all the components are kind of considered as entry components. And there's a lot of details into that, but we'll not go into those for now. So this is what my component looks like currently. It's called, the selector is called ng search bar, and it has a property called text field, which is received from the consuming application. And this is what we have built. This is the Angular code that I've written for creating the input element, input field, and the enter some text here. The placeholder that you see currently is what it receives from the consuming application. Now, if you want to consume any web component in an Angular application, there's just one thing that we need to tell Angular to accept web components, and that's the schemas array. So you need to tell Angular that, okay, there's some custom elements which you might expect, and it's not a regular Angular component. So custom element schema is the thing for that, and any other component would just work. But the main thing is how about outside Angular, because we are talking about communication of frameworks, right? So then comes the build process. And when it comes to the build process, we get to know that, okay, Angular doesn't officially support, building your web component and exporting it outside for now. But with Ivy, obviously, there's a lot of things going on. But there's a community project that actually allows you to do that. The project is ngx build plus by Manfred, and this basically helps you add all the polyfills which earlier you were adding manually. You don't need to do that, and you can simply add it to your project using ng add ngx build plus. This will get you all the polyfills, and you can simply add it using ngx build plus wc polyfill. This will generate the required polyfills for you, and there's no manual way of doing it now. And what it would do is that it will build your application, build your particular component with a single bundle flag, because you want a single bundle. You don't want multiple files to be exporting, because no framework would accept so many files coming in, so many script files coming in for just including one particular component that the framework is interested in. And you would make sure you keep the polyfills, because polyfills is your best friend, right? So you would want to build the component, and you want to publish it to the npm repository. If you think my component is the best and people can leverage it for their projects, then you can pack it and then publish the package to npm registry with the access public, obviously, if you want. And so that's our component that we created. I pushed it to the npm repository. You can try it out. And what this basically will allow us now to do is to use in different frameworks. So we'll try to use this component that we just created, a very simple component in React. So we are trying to consume this component, this input field in a React framework now. And there are two main things that we need to do: install web components and use it in a React template with the selector that we have, right? So first thing, include the script. and you can use unpackage or any other packagers that allow you to get the component from npm. I'm using an unpackage here. This gets me the package, and I'm referring to the single bundle which was for the main.js file, right? This is just the main.js file which includes the polyfills that I was needing, which includes all the other functionality of my web component. Now, inside my React code, it's a very simple create React app that I'm using. And I'll just place this particular component that you see in the second line here, which says ng search bar, which is the selector of the component that I'm using. Then you have this text field, which will be the placeholder of my input field. I don't want it to be enter some text here, which was there in the Angular application. I want it to be the React way of whatever you want to put in the React framework project. And this says that let's enter something from this create React app now. So moving on, would it work? Do you think there's anything left? It should work, right? But doesn't seem to be working. What's next? Polyfills. So in the consuming application also, even if you kept the polyfills in your web component, you need to add polyfills to the consuming application. Otherwise, the application won't support your web component. So do you understand how famous polyfills is in the world of web components? So we need to include it at every step in the process. In your web component, when you're exporting your web component, when you're consuming your web component. So add polyfills to your React code, and then would it work? Let's check. It does. So it's a basic create React app. It's that same input field that we created using the Angular framework, but the placeholder is different. And the placeholder is exactly what we specified in the React code when we were placing the selector. So it says, well, let us enter something from this create React app now. Great, that works in React. This is how we could communicate between frameworks using web components. And it was just pure JavaScript code after we exported it and made it available to any other framework. So you see how you're able to carry your favorite Angular functionality to other frameworks. And this is not just the case of frameworks, but a vanilla JavaScript project as well. Because the web component that you exported, right, it's just JavaScript. So your regular JavaScript project also should be able to access it. So, if you want to try it out with a regular JavaScript project, you can do that as well. And I'll share the links to, my this npm repository where I created the search bar component so that you can simply go ahead and try out in the different frameworks. Now, this is the Staglets example that I'll be referring to in the end of my presentation, and we'll look at some code the way I'm doing it in Angular, but after my slides. So this is the link that I'll be sharing with you in the live chat also, so you can, in the meantime, figure it out, what's happening, what's wrong, all that. And before we go to the code example, I know that the 30 minutes is not okay to understand. It's not enough to understand what web components are, because there's a lot of deep diving that you need to do to understand web components better, especially when you're actually doing it. So what I did was I actually created a code lab for you to follow step by step and understand what really happens that when you're dealing with web components, when you're dealing with custom elements, when you're dealing with the specifications like no leaking of your styles or nodes. So this is the link that I'll be sharing with you of the code lab, and you can refer to this. I've also put the link of the repository here. This is the repository wherein I'm creating the web component, the Angular code of creating the web component. And we'll finally go to the code and look at that. But before, okay, let's just go to the code now and try to understand. So it's a very basic, example of a text here, and we have this app module. So like I said in the beginning, I hope this is clear to you, the text which is written here. I'll just make it separate. Yeah. So this is my app module here, and we are using this injection and using an instance of the injector service so that we make sure that dependency injection works for our web component. Now, we don't want to bootstrap manually the app component in this line, just like we do in any other regular Angular application. We don't want to bootstrap that because we don't even want the app component to start up at the startup of our application. We just want that this Angular application should create a web component for me, and that should launch when I want it to launch. So if you're not using the bootstrap array, the other way of manually doing it is to use the ng bootstrap ng do bootstrap method. And in here, just like we saw in the slides, we are using the create custom element. Where does that come from? Create custom element comes from the Angular elements package. So since we added Angular elements, we have the create custom element available, method available. We have created a hello component. So let's just look, do we even have a hello component? We do have a hello component, right? So this hello component says that, okay, there's just one heading which has a hello keyword in here, and the name which it's supposed to be receiving from the consuming application, right? Now the input, like it says, the name has to be coming from an outside consuming application. So if we go back here to our app module, let me just close this. We are doing the injection here, which is not required for the moment. And finally, we are registering it to the browser. So if you focus on this line now, my component selector is called my com, right? My hyphen com. And what is the element that it should refer to? This ELE this particular thing is the element wherein, which captures the element that you just created, the instance of your hello component. So this is really required to be registered to the DOM. Otherwise, the browser would not understand it, just like another div tags or h1 tags. Now, if I place this my comp tag in any other Angular component, it would just behave like an Angular component, right? That's not something that we want. So let's go to the index.html, which doesn't have any Angular functionality going on there. We don't have app root here. Do you see? Just like we have my app or app root in our regular Angular applications, we are not starting that. We're not doing that. We just want that in the index.html, it should not even start up my Angular application, but just refer to the to the web component that I created, which is the my comp selector. So we are doing that here, and the name is, this is the property binding that we are doing in case of web component. Now, if you look at the Angular way of doing it, you would have something like this, right? Where this is property binding, and then you would give it some property that you want. This is the Angular way of property binding. However, this is not something you want. The custom elements way of binding the properties, defining the property for your web component, is a simple property name and then whatever name you want to specify. So do you see how this consuming application, which is in this case just your index.html, which is a, you can think of it as a regular JavaScript code, or just an HTML file which is consuming the code from your consuming application. So you're specifying the property here. This is how you're doing the property binding for your web component. And if you want to see how we need to include the script, there's nothing in your app component, very regular stuff. There's nothing done here. Here also we don't even render the app component, so there's no hi on the screen that we see. And what else you would like to see? The thing that we did in the app module in the do bootstrap, you could actually do that here also in the bootstrap module. So this is like the entry file of your Angular application. This is what makes sure that, from the first you go to the app module takes you to the different components that you're defining. So this is kind of the path that you need to follow. And the polyfills, you don't need to specify anything, because while creating, you were actually, keeping the polyfills. And in the consuming application, since this is just index.html, you don't need anything here. So I hope this particular Staglets link is shared with you, and you will try it out. And I'll also share the code lab link with you in a bit. And you can refer to that code lab and play around, and it lists down all the dependencies that you would need. All the it's like a cookbook which will allow you to code along and then build your own web component, but make sure you add polyfills. So I think that's pretty much it, and I'll just refer to the few resources that I followed, which would be very beneficial for you as well to dive deeper into, so that you can use those and create your web component. So first is the book, that Web Components in Action, that I was talking about in the beginning of my talk, and this is really helpful for you to understand the idea behind web components, when it was nothing about frameworks, but just about why web components are required and how do they help you in web development. Then there are a few links about how Angular does it. The second link that you see here is the Angular elements part. So the way Angular elements package allow you to use web components in your consuming applications. And then we have web component specifications. Now, this is a really good link about learning all the fundamentals of web components. If it's about shadow DOM, if you want to dive deeper into what shadow DOM is, if you want to dive deeper into why what happened to HTML imports or all that. So this is really a great link for that. And then there's this YouTube video. So when you get these slides, you will get reference to all these links as well, and you'll be able to access this particular YouTube video. And I think that's pretty much it. I'd like to thank you all really for being here and enjoying all these sessions. This being day 4, you're really I can see the enthusiasm. And just one last thing that I would like to mention is that there's a lot of scope for learning and contributing. And to all of you attending today, I would ask that if you're really interested, please reach out to me, and we can do dedicated sessions. We can do pair programming. I can learn with you, you can learn with me, and we can all do this together. And this community that we are building slowly is just great. So it would be fun. And I mean, I also started 2 years ago after college, and it's just great that we can contribute and learn together. So please reach out to me, and we can do something together. Thank you, everyone.